everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the information meeting for the proposal addition to the Chateau Laurier. My name is Charmaine Fourier. I'm pleased to be your moderator this evening. My role is to ensure that everything goes smooth in the meeting and we keep on schedule. I'd like to remind everyone that Rogers TV is live broadcasting the presentation tonight, so please, everyone, you could turn off your cell phones, that would be great, or put them on vibrate. Thank you very much. Just get right into it. The purpose of the meeting tonight is for you to learn more about the site plan control and heritage applications for the Chateau Laurier addition. Also to provide answers to the questions, which I hope you folks had some opportunity to ask some questions out there in the lobby and get to see the great drawings that were out there tonight. Also to collect your feedback. So there was feedback forms, and there's also the opportunity to do feedback forms after the presentations. We want to identify approval authorities, who has the appeal rights in the process, and outline the time frame for approval. So for tonight, the agenda, as listed behind me, we did the registration and the open house, welcome and introductions, and there'll be the applicant's presentation, the city staff's presentation, next steps, and closing remarks. And then also there'll be an opportunity for you to go back after you've seen the presentation to have that additional one-on-one time and have some Q&A at that time as well. Councillor Fleury will be joining us at the in a few minutes. He's just held up in traffic, so he was going to do some opening remarks, but we'll just get to the presentation tonight. So before we get started, I want to do some introductions. There's a lot of great folks here in the audience. First of all, I'll put it over to the applicant. If you can please introduce. Over to you, Peter.
Good evening. My name is Peter Clues. I'm the architect for the applicant Larco.
I'm Michael McClellan, the conservation architect for the project.
I'm Sally Coots, a senior heritage planner at in right-of-way heritage and urban design.
Hi, I'm Allison Hamlin, and I'm the file lead planner on the site plan control application.
And also here with us this evening is Kaya Servani, is the landscape architect. Also, we have Dennis Jacobs, if you can just put there's Dennis Jacobs, and Suzanne from the Momentum Planning and Communication, representing the applicant, Larco Investments. Art Phillips from Larco Investments, if you can put your hand up there as well. And we also have some city staff here as well. We have Dana Collins, who's the program manager for Heritage and Urban Designs, Doug James, who is the manager of Development Review, Cork Curry, who is the manager of right-of-way and heritage and urban design, and I'm not sure if Randolph is in the audience, but no. And then Andy Resides is here as well. Thank you. So that really opens it up for the presentations, which I know that's what everyone is here for. So I'm just going to put over to Peter and Michael. So here you go. You're good, and that's actually glass, so you can't put something on it.
I can or I
can't?
Yes,
you can.
Okay. Put my water there. Good evening, and thanks for coming out. I want to talk first of all, I'm assuming that everyone's had a chance to at least see the model and the drawings out there. So rather than giving you a long explanation or description of the building, I really want to talk to you about what our thoughts were in putting this together, our hopes and intentions. And then obviously your feedback and commentary is important to us. This is the fourth iteration of the proposed addition to the hotel. Some of you may recall I presented about a year and a half ago. That was the second iteration. And since that time, or 18 months ago, we engaged in a heritage working committee that was struck by the city of Ottawa. Michael McClellan was actually on that committee, as well as two other architects. And we spent probably, I think, about 3 months going back and forth, studying various different options, and ultimately resulted in what we're presenting this evening. What's important to understand here at the outset is that we're not actually asking for a zoning change, that what is permitted as of right on this site, where it's currently occupied by an above-ground parking structure, is a 185,000 square foot addition to the hotel. What we're proposing tonight is a building that's about 135,000 square feet, so it's considerably less. It's about 25% less in overall area than we initially presented almost 2 years ago. So it's, if you're concerned about building bulk and mass, it's going in the right direction in terms of getting smaller. I think that, but one of the critical issues to deal with in terms of the analysis and ultimate approval of whatever gets built here is the interface of this building with the hotel, the historical hotel. And there is a so-called heritage overlay that we have to, as architects and as applicants, obviously have to be mindful for. That juxtaposition and adjacency of the existing hotel and how we really relate to that. And I think that there are two fundamental ways in which this proposition or any other proposition should be evaluated. One is on built form, on massing. That is how tall it is, how long it is, what its shape is, how it sits relative to the existing hotel, how far away it is, whether it joins it. And the other is what I would refer to as architectural language, or more sort of, as a layperson, architectural style. So should we build in the style of the existing hotel? And those of you may believe that that is the appropriate response. Or should we build a building of our time that is, in a way, deferential and doesn't confuse the kind of the cultural marker? And what I mean by that is that buildings within cities, indeed outside of cities, are really, in a way, collective cultural markers of our time. So when a building is built, it speaks to what people believed in, what they aspired to, what they hoped for. And in the hotel, the existing Chateau Laurier is no exception. It really speaks to a time, the turn of the century in this country and in this city, about what constituted an important private building, but a public building in sense of a hotel. And its builders and developers at the time believed that the architectural style that it adopted was noble and appropriate to what they were trying to build in this city. As we are now in the 21st century, the question is that all of you have to ask yourselves as you respond to this and think on it, is should we be building in that style, or should we be building in a style of our time, but be deferential to what came before? And I think that this is a great debate, and it's, in some ways, it's a subjective debate, and it really comes from who you are and what you believe in terms of your city and your country and your culture. And that's not something that I can debate with you. You either believe it or you don't. So as an architect, what we have to do is give form and function to a building proposition. We have to have absolute regard for the hotel, what has come before. And we believe in this iteration we have come much closer to developing a building that is deferential, and we would suggest complementary to the historical hotel. And I'll just take you through it and explain why I think that. So the hotel is interesting in the sense that it was built in 3 stages. The first was the 1912 edition, and then there were 2 subsequent additions to that. But it's 1927, which generally built upon the original architectural language and style of 1912. And then there was, of course, the parking structure that you see today in the 1960s built on the back of the hotel. The important, I think the relevant part of this image is that it speaks to really the sidedness of the hotel, that Rideau Street was considered the front of the hotel, and Mackenzie and, of course, the canal on the 2 flanking faces, the east and west faces, were obviously also considered very important frontages of the hotel, one relating to the parliamentary district to the west, and of course Rideau Street as being an important ceremonial street in the context of Ottawa. And the hotel has always had a kind of a notional back on Majors Hill Park. That's not to say it's the fact that it should be forgotten, but it is, in a way, not the principal face of the hotel. And one of the things that we've really thought long and hard about, and particularly as part of the working committee, of the Heritage Committee, was what does that hotel really mean in terms of the context of the larger precinct of Ottawa, the parliamentary precinct. And when we think of the parliamentary precinct, it's obviously the Parliament buildings, the other public buildings that go along and form part of those government buildings. And when they were built, they were adopted in the neo-Gothic style, which was borrowed from the 1400s, late 1400s in Europe, which was the principal ecclesiastical kind of religious style of its day in Europe, which was kind of a collective idea that this would best represent the importance of religion, of this kind of soaring architecture of pointed, vaulted arches, of spires and pointy bits on the roof and everything else. It was really, at the time, saying this is the most important thing to us as humans culturally in Europe. And in the latter part of the 19th century and the early 20th century, in the rise of secularism, that government institutions became the preeminent important public institutions. That style was deliberately adopted. It was borrowed from 300 years earlier. It was very important and proud then, and those that adopted this style thought, and Ottawa being no exception, that this ought to be the style that should be adopted in a parliamentary precinct. When you come to the hotel, which came after a lot of the original iteration of the important public buildings in Ottawa, the decision of the developer of the hotel was to adopt the Chateauesque style. And the antecedents to that style come from French nobility, and prior to that, the royal family in France, which adopted that kind of castle-like structure that almost the hotel emulates today. And what's interesting to me is that sort of 300 or 400 years or 500 years later, the developer of this hotel thought, and other hotels in Canada and the United States, that that would be an appropriate architectural expression to give prominence and kind of a stately quality to staying in a hotel in an important public city. And so what's interesting is when you see the hotel, and I'll show you subsequently in some images that we've done, and they're out there, is that the chateau, while being of a very different architectural style than the neo-Gothic style of the parliamentary precinct, nonetheless asserts itself on the skyline in a very similar way. And I like to say, like most of the architectural action of the hotel starts at the spring point of the roof and goes up. And that's what was shown on the $1 Canadian bill. And that is certainly what important agencies like the NCC are focused on, and their important views, one being from the bridge looking back. And so the first thing that we considered was a change in the built form. And the previous iterations proposed two sort of small tower elements, one on the east side and one on the west side. Those were proposed as 12 stories. What we're showing today is a building that is 8 stories. So it's dropped about 30% in height. It stretches across the northern face of the hotel, whereas the previous one had 2 higher bits and then a lower bit in between. And in working with the committee, we thought, well, really this is, in a way, if you think about it conceptually, not necessarily a hotel, an addition to a hotel. It's more of a building that fronts on a park and forms an important edge to that park. And so in working on this proposal, the idea was to deliberately pull it away from the hotel, so it's set back sort of 4 or 5 meters from the eastern flank of the hotel and almost 18 meters from the western flank, to really set it apart deliberately, that it is not an addition. And it's almost like a building beside. That's not to say that we shouldn't have regard for the hotel. I just lost my very important name piece. But we felt, and others felt, that one of the important elements here is how does this building relate to the park and form a new kind of built edge to that park, as opposed to the raised parking structure that currently exists. What placing the hotel does here, of course, the addition here does, of course, is allows us to then create a courtyard in this location here that allows the kind of the reopening of the northern face of the hotel where the ballrooms open. So there's a series of very kind of prominent arched windows. And the notion here is that the opportunity here rather is that we can then create a courtyard in which those ballroom spaces can actually open out into that space. And so that then there starts to be an engagement between the exterior landscape of the hotel and the interior of the hotel. And I think that this is very important because right now the hotel is a very insular building that was deliberate in terms of the style of architecture. It's very internalized. It has very little engagement with its kind of near exterior space, save and except the kind of entry portal on Rideau Street. So these images are simply, and I'm not going to dwell on them, they're more about the design of the public realm around the hotel, the quality of the landscaping at grade, the idea of using decorative landscaping in a French-inspired style called the parterre style, which we think is appropriate, and our landscape consultant feels is appropriate to the historical context of the hotel, being of a kind of a chateau-esque style. The idea of reopening a drop-off off Mackenzie Street here and then extending that paving through this area, and also developing a language, a landscape language that is complementary to a lot of the public work that has been done in the last year or so on Rideau Street, on Mackenzie Street itself, in terms of the quality of the materials and detailing, so forth. These are just some images and ideas of how that might work, that every horizontal space is considered as a landscape opportunity. The courtyard between the addition and the hotel, the raised roof level that currently right now, if you've been in the hotel, you've seen that. It's the roof of the ballrooms and all the public areas in the hotel, which is really a kind of a back of house area. It's got mechanical equipment and so forth. And the thought there is that we can actually open that up and landscape it and have it as a beautiful thing to look down from those that stay in the hotel. And then, of course, the roof of the proposed addition that is green. So the extent possible, we're trying to green up every horizontal surface. The park edge is an interesting edge. We've been working with the NCC, and to date, what in the NCC's wisdom, they feel is very important that the hotel not have a physical, functional connection to the park. They feel that there should be a very distinctive edge, that there's a park and then there's a building. And it's still early days in terms of, we have not presented this particular proposition to the NCC yet, so there may be, and I know there will be a continuing kind of discourse and debate about how we make that interface. So for the purposes of this evening's presentation, it's very much we're here and the park is there, and we're trying to mediate that, but we're not permitted at this point to have any kind of functional connections, physical functional connections. There is, and I know in terms of the public commentary that I've heard to date in the last number of days, a very great and real concern about bird glass and bird strikes. And this is certainly the city that I come from, Toronto, with particularly extensive use of glass. This is becoming more and more of an issue. And it's not so much the amount of glass you have, it's the quality of glass. So as we build modern buildings with insulated glass, that is to say with 2 or 3 panes of glass, glass buildings, whether they're punched windows with stone or brick between them, or whether they're all glass, present a challenge for birds because it increases the reflectivity of the glass. And particularly when you're adjacent to a landscape area, which Majors Hill Park is, obviously, with trees and grass, and you get the reflected quality of that park into the windows, whether they're big or small, it's still an issue, as I said, then birds get confused. And there's 2 ways in which we will continue to think on this and develop this. But one is that you deal with deliberately trying to create low reflective glass, so not a type of glass is shown in the image on the right, and also to introduce patterning on that glass. Again, in this image on the right, this is a pattern that's been used very successfully in Toronto, where there's a dot pattern which, for some reason that no one really completely understands, birds react to it in terms of the way they perceive light and shadow, and a kind of a moire pattern that occurs to them, and they kind of fly off. They don't fly into it. They kind of veer away. And the first 40 feet of a building is the most critical. And so as we develop the building and the type of glass, we will be, I can assure you, very mindful of dealing with that issue. In terms of the kind of planimetric organization of the building, right now, currently, the hotel is a very grand hallway that runs north and basically provides access to all the principal public rooms, the ballrooms in the hotel. And it ends in a very kind of ignoble way here, where there's a door to a parking garage. And that garage is a couple of feet away from this wall. And so often when you're in this ballroom here, the curtains are drawn, because if you pull them away, you see the windows and you see a blank wall to the parking garage. So as I said, we think there's a real opportunity to open that up and create an outdoor area and really bring natural light back into those rooms. And also, and most importantly, create a functional connection as you move through here, so that as you move down that hallway, you actually see light. And in this case, you'll see through this hallway to the park. And so that it helps you reference your location of the building. And I also think it creates a kind of a more noble termination of what is a very beautiful, almost Beaux-Art quality to that grand hallway accessing the public rooms. The ground floor of this building, so the building is essentially aligned in an east-west direction. It's proposed to be 20 meters wide, 65 feet wide, so very narrow. And what that allows us to do is not only create this courtyard, but also to create, most particularly, a wide separation in this location on the northwest corner, so that and you'll see in subsequent images, as you view the hotel from the canal, you will be able to view in its entirety this portion of the hotel, just by the fact that we've set it back to the north. We're also proposing, in conjunction with this connection, then to have a kind of a public concourse or walkway adjacent to the park. And then the balance of the ground floor here will be public rooms of the hotel. So these will be meeting rooms. So the idea is that there is a sense of openness on the ground floor. So you can look to the park, you can also look to the courtyard. The principal entrance, now this is to be proposed to obviously be part of the hotel with hotel rooms above, but there is the potential to have a secondary entrance here for those folks that are staying in this portion of the hotel can actually access the hotel from Rideau Street. We're proposing the parking entrance here, so all the parking, of course, will be below ground in a 5-level underground parking structure, and the current loading of the hotel will be tucked into here, and then all of this then will be kind of publicly accessible open space that's paved nicely and beautifully, and kind of, as I said at the outset, really trying to relate to the public realm that's developed by the city to date in the NCC. Parking, as I said, will be underground here in 5 levels, so it's out of sight, out of mind. And then on the typical levels above will be hotel rooms both facing the park to the north and to the south to the courtyard, and then the new greened roof between the 2 wings of the existing hotel. So these are what we call architectural elevations. This is from the east, and this is not really how you perceive the building, but it helps you to get a sense of the built form and massing. So, as I said from the outset, we're proposing to drop this down to 8 stories, and why 8 stories is because it keeps it below the spring point of the roof. And as I mentioned, all of the kind of the architectural action of the building here, the dormers, the turrets, all of the kind of the pointy bits of the building, to use layperson's terminology. And so it gives you an idea of the relative mass of this building relative to the hotel. and that what we're really trying to say with this image is we're trying to keep this as deferential and diminutive as possible. And the fact here is that we're proposing 135,000 square feet, which is about 25% less than what the zoning entitlement would suggest that we could do. And that's all part of working with that Heritage Working Committee and really trying to develop an approach, particularly from a built form perspective, that is really subordinate to the hotel. This is the same elevation as viewed from the west. So again, you can see its scale of the hotel relative to the hotel. In here, the 15 or so meter separation between the western wing of the hotel and the proposed addition. Then, of course, the kind of canal walk that comes down here. The north elevation, where we're trying to show here is that all of that kind of architectural articulation is now visible. In the previous iteration, it was blocked, a lot of it, through a kind of the eastern proposed tower and the western proposed tower that was kind of more or less coming up to this height here. Just a section showing the interface of the hotel with the underground parking. It's almost like an iceberg where there's almost as much or more below ground than above ground. Now, there's a series of mandated views that the NCC use and others use to really understand and check and evaluate this and other proposed additions within the parliamentary precinct of Ottawa. And so there's a series of points. There's one here on the bridge that I've already made reference to, another one over here. And we're going to show you some of those and help you, and I think you saw them out here, but it helps to evaluate how this building asserts or does not assert itself on the skyline, in particular the parliamentary precinct. So this is viewed from the parliamentary hill. Again, the point we're trying to make here is that you can view all of those kind of roof elements and articulated elements. From the canal, the fact that that separation allows you to really read the northwest corner as it currently exists of the hotel, which we think and others think is an important view to maintain. Viewed from Majors Hill Park, that you still read the roofscapes. And I think Michael also wants to speak to this after I step down, in just terms of how you will experience the hotel, continue to experience the hotel, and in particular this addition as you move through the park. So this is kind of taken a midpoint of the park. There's a higher element to the north of this, in which more of the hotel will gradually be revealed as you move through the park. This is from the bridge, and it was one of the, I believe, the image that was used in the $1 bill. But again, we're trying to show that in terms of the roof silhouette that currently exists, we are not rising above that. And so that you read this in conjunction with the silhouette of the parliamentary buildings, and that is to be maintained. Viewed from Rideau Street, obviously the principal face of the hotel, you can see the relative size of the addition here, fronting on the canal. Just a closer up image of that. And then moving down Rideau Street to the east, again, you can see it just starting to poke its head around the corner here on Rideau. Just a closer up shot taken from Rideau. Again, this is kind of the eastern portal entrance to the hotel. It exists now, and the idea is to kind of open that up and create that as another drop-off. A view of the courtyard. So these are the existing ballroom windows. One thought was maybe to cut them down to grade so you could actually have large sections that could open, and you could have a kind of an interplay between the functions of the ballroom and a courtyard during clement weather. So for receptions, weddings, that sort of thing, it could actually be very beautiful. The architecture of the hotel itself is intended to be obviously modern, but also very deferential. And so what we're deliberately trying to do here is create something that is almost, to the extent that the building can be invisible, almost invisible, that we've deliberately not used any heavy opaque materials. What we've thought is, in terms of the materiality of the building and a kind of a tie into the hotel, that we would take the stone of the hotel, bring it through in the ground plane. So this is a shot within that link, the proposed link, which would be all glass, with very, very minimal kind of structural support supporting that glass, so that there's a clear separation between the proposed addition and the hotel as you're kind of moving from the hallway. And there, you may recall when I talked about being able to see the park as you move through. And that material, as the use of stone, could actually then appear along the walkway access to the park, and then potentially be used as a cladding material to some of the solid wall surfaces on the ground floor. So it's almost as though that stone is coming along the ground plane and then kind of moving up, almost like a trunk of a tree, and then there's a glass veil of a building enveloping that. There are various details we're studying in terms of taking some of the motifs that are found in the hotel and the decorative patterns, and using that potentially as a patterning on the glass that both deals with the bird issue as well as a bit of a tie-in and a homage in a way to some of those decorative patterns that, as I say, exist in the hotel now, and looking at elements such as the rounded turrets and how do we sort of recall those in certain corner elements of the upper portions of the building. And I'm going to stop right there and just turn it over to Michael, and I think he has a few words to talk about this idea of historical interface and how we ought to respond to important public buildings.
Hi. I can actually be rather quick because Peter took all my points. But I did want to talk about a couple things. One of which is the significance of this building. The Chateau Laurier is loved by everybody. It's an extremely important building for the city of Ottawa and for Canada generally. It's a really important, significant building. And I thought one of the, Ottawa's not alone. If you think of significant buildings and how they're altered, it always has a level of concern and contention. Is this going to work out okay? Is this going to be the right thing to do? What the differences of opinion might be. And if you look at, so I was just going to suggest that one of the things that I've been thinking of is the international aspect of this. So if you think of other significant buildings around the world that have had alterations, you realize there is that level of contention. Is this the right thing to do? So the Louvre had I.M. Pei's addition, the pyramid in the middle. That had huge contention. People were saying, is this the right thing to do? Is this going to be a good thing to do? Why doesn't it look like the rest of the Louvre? Well, it really seemed to be the most discreet and the most simple way to approach an introduction of a new set of structures that were needed to make the Louvre operate. And right now, the Louvre's pyramid is as loved as the Louvre. It's kind of the postcard view is always with that pyramid in the middle. Another one's the Reichstag in Berlin. The Reichstag in Berlin, it had been a bombed-out building, very badly damaged, and Norman Foster was hired to restore the Reichstag. And he did the same thing as I.M. Pei did with the Louvre. It was a very modern alteration, very modern addition to the building. And there was a lot of concern in the German press, partly because it was an English guy doing the work, but also partly because he was approaching it from, he's not restoring the building. He's not actually rebuilding the dome out of stone. He built it out of glass. So there again, there's that concern of, is this the right approach to take? And I think we're taking that very seriously, but looking at it at an international level, there's always this issue about you don't actually replicate the historic element, because in fact, by doing that, you're actually taking away from the authenticity of the original thing that you have. Maybe a more recent example is the Glasgow School of Art. Stephen Hall just did a fantastic addition to the Glasgow School of Art, which was also from a series of English architects. We're looking at, here's an American architect coming in and doing this alteration of the Glasgow School of Art. It's a tremendous project, and you can Google it and look it up. But each one of those shows that at an international level, you really have to step up, and you have to do the best architecture that you can. And I think, and it's not with mimicry, and it's not with imitating exactly what's there, but it is by being deferential and being subordinate, is a word to use. You don't want to be too subordinate because you want to recognize the magnificence of the site that you're on. The second thing I wanted to mention is just the idea about the picturesque. And there's a lot of comment about why isn't this building a picturesque building and how does picturesque work? And I just wanted to do a little fine art thing and say the picturesque was a particular period of time, and it's a particular attitude to design. It started in the 18th century, pretty much, as an idea about very relaxed manner of building. And if you think of picturesque gardens, they're quite beautiful. And if you think of architects who practiced the picturesque, the thing about the picturesque was very inclusive. You could do many different things in the picturesque style. And this picturesque style continued all the way through the 19th century. And if you think of John Nash, was an architect of the period, very romantic and picturesque. His buildings often tended to be classical. They often tend to be clean, simple, built forms. And this is, I think, what Peter's trying to get at is this classicism within the picturesque. If you think of Schinkel, I don't know if people know Schinkel, but a very important German architect who worked in the middle of that picturesque romantic period, and his buildings tended to be highly structured classical buildings in a picturesque surround. If you look at the Ringstrasse in Vienna, there was a whole mixture of buildings meant to be very romantic and the kind of what they brought to the site. In Ottawa, you have the Gothic Parliament buildings in a picturesque setting. So there's a mix of buildings that's quite appropriate to do. And I think the scale relationship that we have here with the chateau being quite large and the addition being smaller, it's okay to be a modern building. I think that's kind of the lesson that we can learn from an international review of both the picturesque and the kind of additions that are happening elsewhere in the world. Those are really the two comments I wanted just to bring in that kind of context. Peter mentioned also Major Hill Park, and I was just saying about these aspects of the views. The picturesque is a style that you walk through. You're actually moving through. So actually to take static viewpoints is somewhat contrary to the style. And I know there's some specific places in Ottawa, you say, what's the view like from this location? But really, in a park like Major Hill Park, you need a view that takes you through the park so you can see it in different locations. And the view that we have out there shows it in a depressed part of the middle of the park. It's not where the pathway is. The pathway is further away from the hotel. And I think if you took a view from the pathway and saw your view as you went through, like almost like a video, you'd get a different perception of how the chateau is viewed with the addition. So I think our team is going to look at that. I think we're also going to look at night views, and just in terms of we want to understand how the fritting and how the glass works with the night views, and the more we can learn about that, the better. Those are really the only comments I wanted to make. I didn't talk nearly as long as Peter, but that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter and Michael. I'd just like to acknowledge that, yes, there, you were saying over there, Councillor Fleury, that Councillor Fleury came in. And also I'd like to acknowledge that Councillor Nussbaum's assistant, Laura Milou, is sitting up there. There you go. And there, I'd like to acknowledge Councillor Harder. Alison Sterling is sitting here as well. So thank you for joining us. And now I'm going to turn it over to city staff, Alison and Sally, who are going to walk us through the process, the comments that we've heard so far. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Allison Hamlin, and I'm the planner for the site plan control application. And I'm joined here tonight by Sally Coots, who is the heritage planner on this file. There are other colleagues here from the city planning department. You'll be able to recognize us by our name tags. So when we move out again to look at the boards and the model after the presentations are over, if you have any questions for city staff, please come and find us. We'll be happy to answer your questions. So I'd just like to take a little bit of time to take you through where we are today and what we've heard so far on this development proposal. I'll explain the development applications that are required for this project to proceed, and I'll review quickly the planning policy and the heritage guidelines that apply to this site. So as you're aware, this project has changed from the original proposal in 2016. Peter mentioned, in fact, this is the fourth iteration. And these changes have come about as a result of feedback from members of the public, from city staff, from NCC staff, and from other technical agencies such as Parks Canada. So we're still in that process of taking your comments and taking your feedback so that we can review this proposal. And as Peter mentioned also, there was a group of heritage professionals, a team that was struck to provide advice to the LARCO team. So city staff have offered some feedback already on the earlier proposal, and the major topics we were commenting on, were height and massing, the roof design, the window patterns, the materials, including the use of stone or glass, changes to keep the addition from overwhelming the existing building, and the connections to the area around the building, the Rideau Canal side terraces, the Majors Hill Park, and Mackenzie Avenue. And I think looking at the revised proposal, you can see that there have been changes made in all these different areas. So from 2016, when the original proposal was made, 1,800 people have commented on this proposal. Since the revised proposal came in about 3 weeks ago, we've had 120 people comment on this proposal. And I'll just review some of the comments that we've heard, because some of the comments are the same with both proposals. As was mentioned earlier, there are concerns about the style, and that we've heard that the addition should be in the same style or a seamless replica of the hotel. And we've also heard concerns about obstruction of views, particularly from the north, from Majors Hill Park, and concerns about the use of glass, concerns for glare or for bird collisions. And regarding the height, so as was mentioned earlier, the original proposal had 2 pavilion buildings, 11 and 12 stories. The proposal today is for 8 stories, and generally that reduction in height has been well received. So we're still looking for your comments, and those comments will be taken, and I will prepare an as we heard it report that will also go into the heritage report that will go to Built Heritage Subcommittee. And how to make your comments? There are comment sheets outside. Probably somebody showed you those on the way in. We also have these cards here, have your say. There is a dedicated city website to this project. Have people, just maybe by show of hands, how many people were aware that there was a website on the city's website related to this project? Okay, that's great. So that's one place where we're keeping people informed of what's happening with this proposal, and I urge you, if you have questions that come to mind after this meeting, that you could go and look there as well. So we're going to put links to the architect's presentation on the website after this meeting too. So as Michael mentioned, we know that this is a site occupies a very special place, not just in Ottawa, but in Canada. It's across the Rideau Canal from the parliamentary precinct, but it's a privately owned site. So this site does not require federal land use approvals for its design. The city is the one reviewing the development applications, and I'll just go through quickly the development applications that are required. So it needs a site plan approval, and site plan approval is a process that examines development to make sure that it's safe and orderly and functional. We look at plans related to servicing and drainage and the building design and the site design. And generally, site plans are approved under delegated authority. They don't generally require a decision of City Council. I'd also like to share with you the official plan policy. So this site is within the central area of the city's official plan. It's within the canal character area of the central area secondary plan. Both Mackenzie and Rideau Street are designated as scenic entry routes on the in the official plan. And you saw an image earlier too about protected views. So this site is within an area of foreground height control for views to the Parliament buildings. But I should also note that the 8-story proposal conforms to the policies of the official plan. In terms of zoning, the site is zoned mixed use downtown, and hotel is a permitted use. It's also subject to a zoning provision called the Heritage Overlay, and it would appear that this design will require about 3 variances, minor variances, related to the Heritage Overlay. One is for the replacement of the parking garage with the addition, another is for the setback from Mackenzie, and a third relates to the frame, the projection on the north side of the building. So minor variances require or go under a different process. They require a decision of Committee of Adjustment, and we anticipate that that will be happening later this spring. But before those applications, the site plan control application and the minor variance application can proceed, this proposal requires a decision of Built Heritage Subcommittee and Planning Committee, and Sally's going to explain to you that process. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, Allison introduced me. So again, I am the Senior Heritage Planner at the city, and this is a file that I will be working on over the next few months because the Chateau Laurier is designated individually under the Ontario Heritage Act. So since it is a designated building, an addition to it requires the approval of City Council and the issuance of a heritage permit. At this point, a heritage application has just recently been submitted by the proponent, again, which is what we call an application to alter a designated building. Just out of interest, the proponent has also already applied for and received permission to demolish the parking garage that has been was emptied in early January. Once, now that the application is submitted, Heritage staff will begin to evaluate it, propose revisions, and begin to prepare the report for the consideration of Built Heritage Subcommittee, Planning Committee, and City Council. When evaluating the addition, staff, as we do with every application that we evaluate, will have regard for Parks Canada's standards and guidelines, other international charters, the findings of the Heritage Working Group, and other related documentation. We will also take into account the opinions in the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement that was submitted as a requirement of the application under the Act, and feedback that we've been gathering from the public. In addition, I should like to share with you that tomorrow afternoon this revised proposal will be in front of what's the city's Urban Design Review Panel. while the panel can look at anything related to the design, we have asked them, as we do other applicants, a few targeted questions regarding the particular application, so we've asked them to comment on the proposed materials, specifically with respect to the compatibility with the existing heritage building, the visibility of the project from and connections to the public spaces around it, and key views of the addition, particularly from the north. Members of the public can attend Urban Design Review Panel, but only as observers. And tomorrow, the Chateau project will be heard at 3:30 in the afternoon here at City Hall in the Colonel By Room, if anyone is interested in sharing that or hearing that submission and the consideration of the panel. Looking beyond the current public consultation period, there are other ways that you can participate in this process in the future. When I complete my report that will be before committee and council in the spring, if you fill in the sign-in sheet or the comment sheet with your name and email and mailing address, we will ensure that you are advised when the Heritage Report is available on the city's website and the date that is going to committee and council. And then if and those comments can be forwarded to the committee. You can also in person comment at the Built Heritage Subcommittee and Planning Committee, and any member of the public at those meetings can sign up to speak for 5 minutes max. And then the report that you'll be commenting on will also, as Allison mentioned, it will summarize and respond to comments that we have received to date. And then the ultimate decision on the issuance of the heritage permit is made by City Council, and the Heritage Act provides the appeal process under the Heritage Act is only the owner can appeal. Unlike a zoning bylaw where any member of the public can appeal a City Council decision. Again, as Allison mentioned, we're happy to answer any further questions outside in Jean Pickett Place, besides the displays that are there. So, thank you. Whoops.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Sally. Thank you for the presentations. And as was mentioned, if you've signed up on the sign-in sheet, there is the opportunity to continue the conversation through the email and the circulation piece. Also, the comment sheets are there. Councillor Fleury, would you like to? You're good? Okay. I just wanted to acknowledge then, just in case he had some closing remarks. But that ends for the evening. There will be continuing the conversation outside on the boards. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the applicant, Michael and Peter. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you, Art, for attending, and also thank you to city staff for attending. Thanks very much for attending tonight, and have a safe night. Thanks. Bye.